All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We're so excited to have a great turnout for this webinar, and I'm really excited for all of your interest. We're looking forward to talking to you today about some opportunities we have in the Office of Tax Policy. Just to maybe we can, as we all talk, introduce ourselves. My name is Lily Batchelder. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy. And we really appreciate the ABA hosting this webinar. We were speaking to them a couple weeks ago about how as we started having some open positions, we really wanted to expand beyond our traditional hiring networks and making sure we were pulling in the talents of everybody across the country. And they graciously offered to pull together this webinar. So thank you so much to the ABA. I know some of you are familiar with what OTP does. Some are probably not. So we thought today we would take an opportunity to walk through what we do, what it's like working here. What I first want to say is it's an extraordinary group of people. You have a small collection of our legal team here, and we are incredibly lucky to be able to do interesting and important work. It really runs the gamut from legislation to conceiving of and drafting regulations, to partnering with the IRS on how to implement certain provisions. And I'm guessing that many of you are currently working in private practice and kind of enjoying the puzzle of trying to figure out the best tax results for your clients. All of the other folks leading this webinar can speak to this, but one of the things that might strike you if you joined us was what a great opportunity it is to think about what the tax rules should be from the perspective of the public interest and not from one client's perspective. It's just an extraordinary opportunity to serve the public interest. Another thing that might strike you is really the breadth of the issues that we cover. We have about 40 to 45 lawyers who cover the entire tax code. We partner very closely with the IRS Chief Counsel office, which has far more. But this means that every single lawyer on our team covers a really large portfolio and makes very consequential decisions, which is why we're so excited to have your interest. And I think the last thing that might strike you is the people. OTP is just a wonderful group of people. I only started in September. I have known many people who have worked in this office over the years. They are some of the best tax lawyers and economists in the country who are deeply committed to serving the public, work diligently, creatively, collaboratively. It's a really great team that transcends across administrations and is very cohesive and works incredibly well together. And I have just felt so privileged to work with everybody on this team, and I know that you would too. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Tom West, who is our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, and he can provide a bit more of an overview, and then to the heads of our legal offices and some of their team members to describe a little more what working at OTP is like on a day-to-day basis. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks so much, Lily, and thanks to everybody listening here today. Thanks for your interest in the Office of Tax Policy and potentially in public service. We hope to give you a sense of what it's like to work in this office, some of the things that we work on, and really why it is such an amazing place to work. And I really, really believe it is the best place for a tax lawyer to work anywhere in the world. And it's part of the reason I'm so excited to talk with you and to talk about our office a little bit. The Office of Tax Policy, as you'll come to see over the next hour, is really central to the entire tax system in the United States. We work with everyone. We work across regulations and legislation and all kinds of day-to-day policy issues that you probably don't get to encounter in your everyday practices, wherever they may be, but it's really exciting. I think if there's anything that works against us, frankly, it's the fact that there's an opacity to how this office works and what we do. So we're really looking forward to kind of pulling back that curtain a little bit. I can tell you, I'm in my second go-round at the Office of Tax Policy. I was here for about 5 years, starting in 2014, and I came back at the beginning of this administration. And even though I was in a job that I really enjoyed at the time, when I had the opportunity to come back to the Office of Tax Policy, it was a no-brainer decision. This really is such an amazing place to work with so many great people. But I can tell you the first time I came into Treasury was probably more in a position that some of you are. I had been working in the tax world for a long time. I was probably a little bit older than a lot of the people who come into tax policy in the first instance. I had been practicing for about 15 years, working in DC for a lot of that time. I was a partner at a law firm when I came in. And even though I was around the Office of Tax Policy, I'd certainly seen people in the Office of Tax Policy speak on panels and that kind of thing, and even had friends who worked here. I couldn't tell you on a day-to-day basis what was happening in the Office of Tax Policy. And that's something you hear from a lot of people who express interest in our office. What is it that you guys do? So I can tell you when I came in the first time, I took a job as what is called Deputy Tax Legislative Counsel. It's a completely impenetrable title that doesn't really tell you much about what the job is. But I came in with all this experience working mostly in corporate and partnership transactional tax issues. And I got into the position, and I found not only was I working on some of those issues, but I also had to get up to speed on not-for-profits and estate tax and accounting methods and the, at the time, relatively new premium tax credits. We really do cover the waterfront, as Lily said. The entire tax code is kind of what we're charged to work on. And while somebody who comes in as an attorney advisor usually has a portfolio that they work on a little bit, that's a little bit more narrow, you still never know what issues are going to come up on a day-to-day basis in your space. They may be things that don't often come up in private practice or in policy work that you do on the outside. So it's, from the very beginning, it's just really interesting. And Lily touched on this. What I came to appreciate that's so much different than at least my experience in private practice is you come to issues, or you're asked to look into issues, and you're really being asked, what should the answer be? And that can be like 180 degrees from when you're working, for example, for a client, and you're trying to fit that client's facts into whatever the existing authorities are. Can you imagine how different it is when you're not trying to figure out, do I fit into this particular revenue procedure or revenue ruling, but instead you're helping to draft the revenue ruling or the revenue procedure that's going to be the thing that all the rest of the taxpayers have to follow along with. It's very different. It's very cool. It's very interesting, and it's super impactful. Imagine, you're just basically writing on a clean slate a lot of the time. So you're trying to make the rules work better for everyone, and it's a really rewarding experience. I often, when I was on the outside of the government, you would run into an issue in practice and you'd be complaining about the impracticality of a given framework, for example. Well, imagine suddenly you're on the outside, you're complaining that those rules don't work for taxpayers, for your client, or how you think they should work for low-income individuals. And then you're on the inside and you're trying to figure out how to make those rules work, and you get a say in how those rules should work. It's just it's very different. It's very cool. And you're actually working on these big groups where some of the things you're writing end up as Federal Register regulations. You got to do that. And so it's super fascinating, super rewarding as a tax lawyer. I used to think about, in private practice, working on an enormous reorganization or a $200 million spin-off transaction. That would be really interesting. And I'm not saying it's not. I mean, lots of people do lots of interesting work on the outside. But imagine you get to participate in rewriting the spin-off rules. It's a totally different ballgame, right? Imagine you're in practice and you get a great result for your client on an audit adjustment. Okay, that was always something that was really rewarding and satisfying. But then imagine if I said you got to write the rules that help deliver tax credits to tens of millions of families. It's the kind of thing that can actually save lives. That's the kind of thing that we work on here all the time. And as a tax lawyer, to actually get to say you do something that has that kind of real world impact, it's just, as you can imagine, immensely rewarding. And it's one of the things that, I just had no idea for most of my early days in practice that there were jobs like that available in the tax world. I said we're at the center of the tax world, and that really is true. we work on all of the tax regulations that come out with our colleagues at IRS Chief Counsel. And we work on all the sub-regulatory guidance with IRS Chief Counsel. That's another great place to work, by the way. We're talking today about our gig here, but IRS Chief Counsel, they are invaluable colleagues and great colleagues. And I always like to put in a plug for them. At the same time, we're working on that kind of guidance. Oftentimes we're working with folks up on the Hill, the tax writing committees on the Hill, who ask us for help in looking at bills, tax bills that they might be working on. So there's lots of interaction with Senate Finance, House Ways and Means, Joint Committee on Taxation. Very interesting stuff. Finally, well, not finally, we get to work with all the different economic teams at the White House on policy, on the administration's budget. Our Office of Tax Policy plays a critical role in developing the ideas that the administration puts forward every year to say, this is how we think the tax system should work. There's no other place in the world where you get to do all of those things. The last thing I'd say is we get all of the great kind of tax ideas that are generated out in the world, and also some of the bad ones, to be frank. They come to us, and we have lots of interesting conversations with practitioners, with all the leading tax thinkers in the world, and we get to engage with them on a weekly basis. We have meetings with people who have, who are on the leading edge of tax ideas, and all of that's happening in the Office of Tax Policy. I know it sounds like a lot, but it is all happening here, and there's just no other place that I know where you can do all of that. So that's really what I wanted to say. I'm very excited for the opportunity to kind of always talk about the Office of Tax Policy. The last thing I'd say for any of you who are in private practice, and I know not everyone is, there are no timesheets here. And really, for my mind, that can be a game changer. And listen, talk to us. We're happy to be talking to you today. We're happy to do follow-up conversations. Talk to anybody who's ever worked here, and I would bet they'd tell you it's the best job they've ever had. And I certainly say that, and I bet all of the folks on the Zoom today would say the same thing. So thank you for your interest. I'm going to turn it over to some of my colleagues who do the work day to day and can tell you about their offices as well.
Thanks, Tom. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Krishna Valbaneni. I'm the Tax Legislative Counsel here at Treasury in the Office of Tax Policy. Everything that Lily and Tom said, I totally second. The one thing I'd point out is that, I'm looking at my screen here, most of us who are going to be speaking today are, I think for lack of a better word, I'll put it, are career employees, or that's how we're designated, versus non-career, which is another way of saying, you're here as a political appointee of some sort. And so that what we have if you're looking at the slide that's up there, you have the secretary, deputy secretary, Lily, who's the assistant secretary, and then Tom, who's the deputy assistant secretary for tax policy, and then other DASs as well. All those folks that I just mentioned are here serving for the administration. Everybody else in these sort of four, ominous-looking boxes at the bottom, BTC, TLC, and ITC, and OTA, are folks who are not here for any particular length of time, meaning that you're hired and you don't need to leave when the administration changes. So I'll put it that way. We don't have anyone here from OTA today, but just to mention what that is, Office of Tax Analysis, those are the economists that Lily mentioned above, who deal with the economic estimates and projections for budget and proposals. But getting to TLC, We are, the easiest way to explain what we do is sort of by negative reference. As Lindsay will mention, International Tax Council, they deal with international tax laws under the U.S. Tax Code and treaties. Benefits Tax Council, as Carol will mention, primarily deals with pension-related issues, employment benefits issues, dealing with that have some interaction with ERISA. And TLC basically covers everything else that you could think of. And so it really is a very broad spectrum of issues. I got to the Office of Tax Policy, it's just over 10 years now, which I did not think was going to happen when I started. When I started, and this is probably true for the vast majority of folks who get to serve in the Office of Tax Policy. We're here for maybe 3 to 4 years, and part of that, at least in my thinking originally, was I know what I know before I come into the government, because depending on which side you are, the government side or let's say the private practice side or representing folks in front of the government, I think depending on your view, one side's probably the dark side and one is not. And so when you bring your knowledge into the Office of Tax Policy, my personal view is that you know what you know. When you're working within the government, you're not necessarily seeing what private taxpayers are doing, because one thing to point out is in the Office of Tax Policy, we don't, we're not involved with tax administration. I mean, that's strictly over at the IRS. But we get to use our knowledge, our experiences, and to sort of help shape what policies ought to be, at least in our view, to the extent they further the then administration's policy goals. And I think a lot of this is, you could have a policy goal, but you actually get to have one that stands the test of time if it can be informed with real world experience on what exactly taxpayers in certain circumstances have to cope with, or how taxpayers might think. And when you come into the Office of Tax Policy, the product that comes out of tax policy is definitely made much better by having a sort of broad perspectives, broad sort of scope of perspectives, working on any particular project. And I think, the one thing that I think I covered this, but I'll just say it again. It is interesting to work sort of as a career person here, in the sense that you get to work on projects and work on different sort of policy goals depending on what administration is in power at the time. And so it's been very, I don't know, in my view, the last few years have been some of the most interesting to work with. And as Tom mentioned, just in the last year, like, one day I'll have, a lot of time focused on like child tax credit stuff. And then, next meeting is on, super fun excise taxes. Next meeting might be on some partnership tax issue. So, it's a huge sort of range of issues we deal with. And as I said, I totally second what Lily and Tom said, that it is such a, I don't know, I just feel very privileged to be able to contribute in a meaningful way. I'm going to turn it over to Shelley Leonard, who is one of our deputy tax legislative counsels here in TLC.
Thanks, Krishna. As Krishna mentioned, I serve as deputy TLC, which is another career role. And I also have a dual role right now as special counsel, working on some cross-cutting issues for the front office. So that's fun. I think one thing that's notable about the people on this panel and the office in general is that a bunch of us are on our second stint here at Treasury. Tom, Helen, myself, and there are certainly others in the office who left and came back. And the reason we came back is because this is such a great place to work. The projects are exciting, the pace is fast, each day is different, and the opportunity to have an impact on tax policy is really unmatched. I left for a few years to work at the Joint Committee on Taxation, where I got to do more work on the legislative advising side, and that was great. But I came back because I thought that the impact that I could have going forward would be even greater here. And when the opportunity arose, I jumped on it. And I am happy to report that that was the right decision. So as far as day-to-day work, Deputy TLC, I spend a lot of time reviewing regulations, sub-regulatory guidance projects, working very closely with our attorney advisors and with Krishna and others, identifying the policy issues, working closely with Chief Counsel on the legal analysis, and trying to make sure that policy issues are briefed up and we get direction and decisions about how to move a project forward. I spend some of my time thinking about administrative law issues that are more cross-cutting, rulemaking authorities that our office as a regulatory agency always needs to be mindful of. When I started back in 2016, during my first stint as at TLC, I was an attorney advisor, just like Krishna. And an example of the breadth of things that we have to cover that people don't necessarily have experience in on the outside. One of my first projects was working on parimutuel gambling regulations. That's a special type of betting that I knew nothing about, but we worked on figuring out how to net the bets for purposes of determining gain. I needed to learn how to pronounce highlight, which uses parimutuel betting, and I had no idea what that was, but I learned something about it, so that was interesting. I also was thrust into the world of the Affordable Care Act. I didn't have a background in that, but learned a lot in my first few years in Office of Tax Policy, and that's an issue I continue to cover. And I find very interesting and meaningful to be able to have an impact there. I think my experience is a little bit different, my background, than people on this panel. I did not specialize in partnership or corporate or international tax law at a Big Four accounting firm or a law firm. I was a litigator with the DOJ tax division coming out of law school and a clerkship through their honors program. And as a litigator, especially we did refund litigation, your cases are whatever walks in the door. So there wasn't the opportunity to specialize so much. So I've really been more of a generalist during my tax career. And I think that fact intimidated me a little bit in coming into OTP, because you do have specialists in a bunch of different areas where they've spent years, decades honing expertise in a particular area of the tax law. But I think that generalist skill allowed me to cover a bunch of different things. I knew how to get up to speed quickly and learn what I needed to know. And that served me well when I was working on pari-mutuel gambling or learning the Affordable Care Act, or delving into a bunch of other substantive issues. And I think that generalist background then allowed me to be elevated to the position of deputy TLC, where the portfolio was a bit broader. And I, as I mentioned, I was in the TLC attorney advisor role for about 2 years, then deputy TLC, and then went to the joint committee. So I think that perspective of having worked on the legislative side is interesting and informs a lot of the technical assistance and advice we provide to the Hill when we help them on their legislative proposals as well. I also had my second child when I worked as an attorney advisor in the Tax Legislative Counsel's office, took a maternity leave. So that is also, of course, possible and doable while you're working in the office. I'll turn it over to Colin Campbell, who is an attorney advisor, to talk about what he does every day.
Thank you, Shelley. Yeah, I think like Krishna, I agree. Everything that from Lily to you, everything you all have said 100%. And I'm very happy that I'm taking the approach I'm taking now, because basically I'm just going to read through what I have on my list today to do from my Treasury Green Book. And those of you who join will be offered one of these if you'd like. And I have a few of these now. But I think the idea here is just to kind of walk you through what I'm going to do, or what I hope to do, and kind of just give you sort of a background on the folks I work with and whatnot. So, you know, just going through the first couple of items, I have 2 meetings with Chief Counsel today. One is on a corporate tax reg, consolidated return related, and the other deals with small business corporations. And as Tom said earlier, the Chief Counsel team at the IRS, they are our partners in tax guidance. And as an attorney advisor, they are the folks who you spend the most time with at the working group level, developing guidance, which we then brief up our respective chains and get calls, and we continue down that path. But I guess the question really is, okay, well, what's it really like? And it's basically you're in a room, or in the past year and a half in a virtual room, though we're now getting back to in person, where you work with folks who you talk to 7 days a week in some cases for months on end. And you develop very close relationships. You know their positions, they know yours, and it really is a partnership. And a partnership is something where you might not always be on the same page. As Krishna noted, they come from an administration and enforcement perspective. We come from a pure policy perspective. And so together we sort of create guidance, which then goes up the chain, and we go from there. Now, I will say this, all the time you spend with them, you become friends with them. For instance, I am in the IRS Fantasy Baseball League. And so it's relationships like that which help you. So if you're not always seeing eye to eye on an issue, you at least know it's a human being you're dealing with. And that pushes the guidance forward in a very positive manner. I also want to just note, I have a couple of meetings with the Office of Tax Analysis. And again, one of those meetings, we're talking about consolidated return regulations. And I cannot emphasize the importance of the economists in the guidance process. They focus on behavior. And what does that mean? That means I have a policy goal. I'll brief Shelley, Krishna, Tom, Lily, and we'll get a call. But I need to know how behavior will be affected by the rule that I'm putting together. So, and the economists like Lucas Goodman, who covers corporate tax, will give me advice, guidance, perspective on how my potential rule will affect taxpayer behavior, and therefore help me predict whether the rule will actually be successful. the other thing is this, I can't also underestimate how important it is to get the economists into the actual guidance itself. It took me a while to learn this, but I have them read every reg very closely on the front end so they can see, you know, if there are any potential holes or anything that jumps out to them. They are extremely brilliant. And as Krishna said, they bring a different perspective, which only improves the value of your guidance. I guess, you know, kind of moving on, I also have a couple of calls today with the IRS commissioner side on the enforcement division side. And the purpose for those calls is also to bring them in to the guidance process very early. And it's to get their perspective on, hey, look, here's a rule. Can you actually use it to do the enforcement? And to get them in early in the process is invaluable because you reject a lot of rules that simply won't work. And it slowly whittles the rule to something that is actually something you would brief up the chain. And all of these different, I don't know, parts of the community within the department, they're all integral to the guidance process, and you develop very close relationships with them. And they make your sort of thought process as sort of a tax advisor so much more articulated and so much more, I guess, complex as you go forward. I know the first reg I worked on, you know, I never knew, you know, until they walked me through it, how valuable they were, the economists, same as the commissioner side. And so, you know, I think that is one of the very, 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 very sort of valuable aspects of working here, is you really see how guidance is put together and you see the different parts of the department and how we all come together to create something. I've got a couple of hours blocked off to work on a technical request from the Hill. And that, as Krishna and Tom were alluding to, is something that we do quite often. We'll receive draft legislation, we'll drop back, we'll think about it, we'll work with our IRS colleagues, and we'll provide comments and suggested technical edits. And as Shelley will tell you, through that process, the Office of Tax Policy develops very close relationships with the Hill on all the tax guidance that comes through us. And so that will probably take me through the day. I've got a couple of hours blocked off to review a revenue procedure on corporate spinoffs. And I've got a couple hours blocked off to work on a couple of other small business corporation regs. Now the question is this a typical day? There's no such thing as a typical day here, because last night I was on the phone with Krishna talking about a memo that we need to put together for the secretary. And so you're constantly reshuffling, you're constantly reprioritizing your day to get the needs taken care of in the order they come in and the priority that they are. And so I guess I would say working here, it's fast paced, no day's the same. And I'll also say this, there's never a bad day at Treasury. There are only some longer days, but you will love it every day here. I'll say this, I started my career as a public school teacher and working with students every day. I mean, it is basically 20 different briefings all at once. And you definitely with 16-year-olds understand very quickly whether your briefing is successful or not. The feedback is a lot less polite than the feedback you might get from Shelley or Krishna. But I will say this, working as a public school teacher, you also saw children coming in, children who didn't get enough to eat, children who had tough homes. And as Tom was noting at the beginning of this, at this presentation, I had a chance to work on the child tax credit. And being able to actually, you know, step out of the sort of corporate tax hat for a while and work on child tax credit and actually make a real difference to the lives of Americans everywhere. It's an experience I'll never get again. And so I guess, I don't know. I know I'm probably coming off very happy and very sort of energetic on the job, but when you start here, you have no choice but to feel that way. It'll be an adventure every day, and it'll go by very quickly. I was just in Krishna's office last night and realized yesterday was my 4th year anniversary and it feels like yesterday. But at any rate, I know we're kind of running short on time, so I will wrap it up, but definitely would love to answer any questions. I'll also say this, please give me a call or shoot me an email, because I'm always happy to talk offline as well, to everybody out there. It's always easier to kind of just talk one-on-one too. So I'm always happy to do that. So I guess, Lindsay, I think it's over to you next.
Thanks, Colin. My name is Lindsay Kitzinger. I'm the acting International Tax Counsel, and like Tom and Shelley, it's my second tour of duty at Treasury. I came to Treasury in 2016 after working at a large DC law firm for a number of years, doing primarily international tax planning for, large U.S. multinationals and planning their foreign operations. I came to Treasury at a very interesting time in 2016, especially if you're an international tax lawyer, because probably the most significant tax reform of our lifetimes passed the following year, at least in the international space. And I got the privilege of working on all the implementing regulations for that. I then left Treasury in 2019 and went back to the firm I had come from. As a partner, I worked there for a couple of years, mostly during the pandemic. And when the opportunity arose to come back to Treasury, much like Tom, I found myself unable to resist. And so I've been back for, a mere 2 months now, but also don't regret it, much like Shelley. It's been a wild couple of months and it's great to be back. Just to give you a high level of what ITC does, I mean, as Krishna noted, we handle all the international aspects of the US tax system from a policy perspective. So that can be outbound US tax, so US taxation of US persons or entities, foreign operations, or it can be inbound, the US taxation of foreign entities or persons who have operations in the US. We do all of the sort of guidance and legislative aspects that everyone thus far has talked about. We consult with Chief Counsel on regs. We consult with the Hill on legislation. The one thing I want to talk about a little bit for ITC, which is slightly different than the other offices, is that we also have a sort of international relations component to our work. So because we deal with international tax, it doesn't just stop at the US borders. We have interactions with other countries and how they tax our entities and how we tax their entities. If you're not familiar with US international tax, we're one of the few countries in the world that has sort of a worldwide tax system where we tax your income no matter where you earn it, is if you're a US entity or a citizen. And so we have a lot of interaction with other countries. And so members of ITC work at places like the OECD to deal with multilateral tax issues. Right now, if you're at all familiar with international tax, you're probably familiar with the global deal on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 relating to the global minimum tax and reallocation of taxing rights. And members of ITC work at the OECD to develop those rules. One other thing I love to talk about that people just can't get in private practice is tax treaty negotiations. So US has a number of tax treaties with other countries. Those are all negotiated by lawyers and economists and OTP. And that's sort of kind of the experience you can only get in government. You're never going to get a client who needs to negotiate a tax treaty because they're not allowed to. So that's just a brief overview of ITC. I want to reserve most of the time to Jim Wang, who's going to talk about, he's an attorney advisor in ITC, and he's going to talk about sort of what Colin did, his day-to-day life.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. I know you've already heard a lot of great information today, and it may be a little hard to remember it. So I'm going to try to be concise and a little bit simpler. I think we in ITC, or at least I in ITC, my job really breaks down into 3 different categories of things that I do. The first is that I work on regs, which we've heard a lot about and is a really great and interesting practice. The second is that I kind of provide tax expertise to other parts of the federal government, including the Hill, as we've heard, but also including the White House and even including, our colleagues in agencies like the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative when they have issues that touch on a combination of tax and trade. And then the third, which Lindsay talked about, is representing the United States in dealing with other countries, either on a bilateral basis or dealing with lots of other countries in international cooperation contexts like the OECD. And that is a big part of our work right now, as Lindsay mentioned, because there is so much emphasis currently on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 and this idea of kind of shaking up the global tax landscape. The exact divide between those three things shifts, every day, and also between administrations. As Lindsay said, during the prior administration, there was a lot of focus on doing regulations because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that had passed, and that was really interesting and really high profile and really important and rewarding. And in the current administration, and specifically this year, there's a lot of focus on making real progress on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, which is very interesting as well, and really tests a totally different set of skills than doing tax regulations, which is a really cool and interesting aspect of the job. As you can see on this slide, the Office of International Tax Counsel is not a huge group. There's really, maybe 10 to 15 of us at any given time, and we have to cover all of international tax. And so we end up being, I would say, semi-generalists in the international tax space. We each do have certain things that we carried with us from private practice that we're a little more familiar with. But at the same time, because of the range of things that can come up and the number of us that there are, we also have to be very flexible. And one of the things that I loved about this job so far is that I'm always learning brand new things. I'm always taking on things that, I never would have gotten the opportunity to even try in my prior life in a law firm. I do get to bring, a little bit more of my prior experience, which is doing primarily cross-border M&A on the tax side, to my practice. But at the same time, I'm doing things like the OECD work or tax and trade work or exchange of information work that I never would have gotten a chance to do in private practice. It's really great. Another thing I will mention is that we are always on, by nature, our job requires us to always be on the cutting edge of tax. There's no repetition, there's no roteness in this job because everything we're doing is basically defining the border and the boundary of tax law. That's really, really exciting and really rewarding. My prior job doing tax M&A was very fun, but as other tax M&A lawyers may know, there is a certain amount of repetition to it, and there is a certain degree of routine to that. And there's very little routine to my job in a very exciting and very engrossing way, which I find to be great. And then last, I think I'll say, regarding something we've touched on a little bit, which is kind of work-life balance. We do work hard here, but we work hard here because we're very passionate about our jobs. We don't work hard because, we have a client that just happens to want something to be done by a particular date, or, because we just have a number of hours that we have to meet for a particular year. We work hard because we want to make sure that we achieve the best result for our only client, which is the United States. And so it's a job where hard work is not a burden or a punishment. It's a privilege and an opportunity. So like Colin, I will say, if you have any questions about the international side, please don't hesitate to email me. I'll put my email in the box too. But with that, I think we should maybe turn it over to our exciting friends at the benefits tax side.
Thank you, James. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see me. I'm Carol Weiser. I am the Benefits Tax Counsel. I almost had to offer my apologies that I could not be with you today because earlier in the day, I was actually on Capitol Hill. Senate Finance Committee was marking up legislation that is specific to retirement. There are a few other provisions in there. So the Senate Finance Committee was marking up the Enhancing American Retirement Now Act, which is, as I said, legislation that is almost totally devoted to providing changes to some of the rules regarding our employer-sponsored retirement plans and individual retirement accounts, with just a few other types of changes there. The markup on the legislation wrapped up a little earlier than we expected, so I'm happy to be here with you today. So in the Office of Benefits Tax Counsel, as I really has already been alluded to, we handle all aspects of employer-provided benefits, retirement programs, health, life insurance, disability, other fringe benefits. We also handle individual retirement accounts and employment tax and executive compensation. We have fewer than 10 lawyers and other advisors. We actually have an actuary that we work with who has actually been with Treasury for a very long time and actually is almost one of our better lawyers. He's so adept at writing regulations and writing guidance, and it actually is very creative and is just a wonderful resource for us on all types of pension and benefit plans, as well as in some cases also some of the welfare benefit programs. So I talked about the work that we do, and others have alluded to the work that we do in drafting and consulting on tax legislation. In the benefits area, we do have in large tax bills, such as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there typically are several benefit provisions. But one thing that we see is that quite often there are separate bills dealing with retirement and with enhancements to the health regulations regarding health plans, so that, for example, in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 that actually passed at the end of 2020, there were significant changes that affected health plans. And Matt Muma from my staff, attorney advisor with my staff who works in our health area, will probably talk about some of that in just a minute when I turn it over to him. When we do work on the legislation, it is often with providing a lot of technical assistance to the drafters on the Hill and working closely with the Joint Committee on Taxation. As my colleagues from TLC and ITC have said, then as we turn to putting that legislation into regulations and other guidance, we work closely with IRS Chief Counsel and do coordinate with folks on the commissioner's side as well, as so that we do know whether these programs are going to be administrable, how do they see this playing out? We also meet frequently with our stakeholders through ABA meetings, through other meetings with stakeholders. Once you have been at Treasury, you sometimes start to lose a little bit of that feel of what did you have in private practice. I did come from private practice and can certainly, well remember my years in private practice, but having now been at Treasury for 7 years, it helps to get the perspectives from other stakeholders, groups that work with plans, groups that work with plan participants, and to hear their different perspectives as we think about how the guidance that we are working on will affect both the employer community and the participant community. One other thing that is different about the Office of Benefits Tax Counsel is that we do have a fair amount of collaboration with other agencies. In particular, with respect to the regulations we work on in the health area. We work a lot with the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Labor on what we call our tri-department regulations regarding the Affordable Care Act. And in areas of joint jurisdiction under ERISA, there are many provisions that are there sort of mirror provisions in the Internal Revenue Code and in ERISA. And even where there are not mirror provisions, the provisions do interact in ways. And so we coordinate also with Department of Labor and with the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. So why don't I turn it over now to Matt to talk a little bit about his day today. And then if we have a moment, then we can also have Helen Morrison, who's Deputy Benefits Tax Counsel, maybe talk a little bit about some of the different work that she does. Matt?
Sure. Thank you, Carol. And thanks everyone for joining. I know we're coming close to the top of the hour, so I'll try to be pretty quick here. As Carol said, I'm an attorney advisor in the Office of the Benefits Tax Counsel, and I specialize in employee health benefits. And I am actually on my first stint at Treasury. I joined about 2 years ago from private practice, where I was an associate specializing in employee benefits and health benefits. And a lot of what I've been doing, as Carol alluded to, is implementing the No Surprises Act, which is part of that Consolidated Appropriations Act she mentioned a moment ago. And that's been a really wide-ranging project involving the Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, the Treasury, IRS, Office of Personnel Management, and of course, White House leadership. And it's run a gamut from working up regulations, working up sub-regulatory guidance, designing websites, which is something I never thought I'd be doing in my legal career, but it's actually quite a lot of work to take regulations text and make it into something that stakeholders can use to work through the process that the United States Congress set out. So my day-to-day life here involves a lot of working on these guidance projects, working on regulations. We also do a lot of work on technical assistance for members of Congress and congressional committees as they contemplate new health benefits legislation. And of course, appearing at public events like this one and other events, for example, in front of the American Bar Association Tax Section and other trade associations explaining our policies and taking questions. And something that helped me coming into this job is it definitely draws upon the legal skills I had honed as an associate, including reviewing statutes, regulations, legal research skills. I am probably closer to the beginning of my career than many others on this panel, so I'm closer to how it feels to be picking up some certain topics for the very first time in my legal career and trying to figure out how they work. And of course, also the experiences you get defending investigations and working on litigation matters. But this job has just expanded what I've worked on in an enormous range of ways. Others have talked about, I've had to work on an enormous number of things where we need to figure out what the rules would be, what the rules should be, not just what a particular client needs or wants. And of course, working with enormous interdisciplinary teams, including the economists in the Office of Tax Analysis, all the different departments that I mentioned, and the IRS. So in my work, sometimes our calls have 40 or 50 people on them working on putting a website together. And this is not an experience I could ever imagine I'd have coming out of law school or private practice. And with that said, I think I could turn it over to Helen if she wants to take a couple words, or back to Lily and Tom to talk about, I think, our open positions in the Office of Tax Policy. So thank you all.
Maybe I'll only make one comment that being at Treasury was clearly the highlight of a long career as a partner. But one thing that was not mentioned is walking into the Treasury building. I know that many of us are still working remotely or have a hybrid job, but the building is just an incredible monument and it oozes history. And every time I walk in there, I have to pinch myself to feel how fortunate I am to have returned for my second tour there. So I did want to mention the building as well as all the work we do. So with that, I think, Lindsay, you're going to talk about the open positions we have. And if you're not excited, you know, Lindsay, the application process isn't exciting, but the work we do certainly is.
Okay. So yeah, so we have open positions currently in all three offices. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly because I know people might have to drop it too. We have a couple of jobs as attorney advisors open in TLC, where they generally look for 7 years of legal experience, and significant experience in one of these subject matter areas would be especially valuable now. I'm not going to read them. You can read them on the screen. To apply for this job and to apply for the ITC attorney advisor job, the listings are on USA Jobs and are open until next Tuesday, June 28th. And they'll have all this detail there as well. So the attorney, ITC has two open positions. One is for attorney advisor, which is same as TLC, except we only look for 5 years of legal experience, and we look for people with broad experience in international tax, no specific experience required. That position, like I said, is on USA Jobs, and you can apply to June 28th. We're also looking for a deputy ITC for treaty affairs position, which is a position that leads our treaty negotiation work. For there, we're looking for people with specific experience, obviously in interpreting treaties and also negotiation experience. If you are interested in applying for that position, you can apply by emailing taxpolicyrecruiting@treasury.gov. And then finally, we also have an open position in BTC where they are looking for 5 years of legal experience with experience in employment tax, executive comp, or other areas of benefits. And you also apply to that position by emailing taxpolicyrecruiting@treasury.gov, which is also the place where you can direct any further questions. I know Jim and Colin put their emails in the chat, but if you want to reach out to anyone else on this panel or to anyone else in OTP, we can direct your email to the right person if you email that email address. So I don't know if Tom or Lily wants to say anything, but I will say thank you everyone for joining us. We are greatly appreciative of your time.
I just wanted to echo that. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to hopefully hearing from you and your interest, and also hope I saw some names that I know were maybe helping us recruit. And so do encourage you to share broadly these slides, the application process, and make sure we benefit from all the incredible talent out there around the country. So thank you again for joining us, and please don't hesitate to reach out to that email address that is on the screen if you have further questions or would like to talk. I think we were able to answer most of the questions in the chat, but not all. So apologies to those that we didn't reach. Thanks again.